It was the night before my son's wedding, a night I'd been dreaming of for years. The evening air carried the faint hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the promise of tomorrow's joy. The entire house glowed with golden light from the rehearsal dinner inside. I stood at the edge of the driveway, clutching a small silver box in my trembling hands. Inside was the family locket, the same one my husband had given me on our wedding day, the one I'd promised to pass down when our son found his forever love. My heart swelled as I walked toward the door. I'd spent the whole day baking his favorite lemon bars, ironing the dress I'd wear tomorrow, and rehearsing the short toast I planned to give at the reception. Nothing extravagant, just a few words from a proud mother. But as I reached the porch, something felt off. The laughter coming from inside wasn't warm. It was sharp, controlled. The kind of laughter that makes you feel like it stops when you enter the room. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door opened. And there she stood. Samantha, my son's fiancée. Her face was flawless, her eyes cold. The glow of the chandelier behind her framed her like a queen in her castle. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, she looked prepared. "Oh," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You're here." Her tone wasn't welcoming. It was almost pitying. I hesitated, holding up the silver box. "I just wanted to drop this off," I said softly. "It belonged to my mother, Anne." She cut me off with a small laugh. "That won't be necessary." My heart fluttered uneasily. I thought it might be something old for the wedding." I tried again, forcing a small smile. That's when she stepped closer, her perfume heavy, her voice low enough that no one inside could hear. "Let's make something clear," she said. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore." I blinked. For a moment I thought I misheard. What do you mean?" She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Michael and I agreed, we're starting our own life. You've been too involved, too emotional. We just need space. You'll always be his mother, sure, but not part of us." Each word struck harder than the last. I felt the cold wind cut across my face as she spoke, my breath catching. "Too emotional," I repeated. "I raised him alone, Samantha. Everything he has was your choice," she interrupted sharply. "You did what you had to. But now, it's his turn to live without being dragged down by your guilt trips." For a few seconds I just stood there, frozen, staring into the eyes of the woman my son loved. Behind her, through the crack in the door, I could see Michael laughing with her family. He looked happy, carefree. He didn't even glance my way. "I see," I whispered. My voice barely carried. I tried to take a deep breath, but it came out shaky. I stepped forward to hand her the box, but she pushed it back gently. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it more than I do." Something inside me cracked right then, quietly but deeply. I nodded once, forcing a smile that didn't belong to me. "Well," I murmured, "then I suppose I should let you get back to your evening." Her smile brightened instantly, like she'd won something. "Yes, that's probably best," she said. "Good night, Mrs. Carter." She closed the door before I could reply. For a moment I just stood there, staring at the wood grain in front of me, the faint hum of music leaking through the cracks. My hand still hovered where the door had been. The silver box slipped from my trembling fingers, hitting the porch with a small, heartbreaking clink. The locket inside cracked, and so did something in me. I turned and walked down the steps, each one heavier than the last. The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the path. My old sedan waited by the curb, its headlights dim, the passenger seat filled with wedding ribbons and wrapped gifts. I slid inside, shut the door and sat there, staring at the warm, glowing house I'd once dreamed of entering as the proud mother of the groom. I could see their silhouettes through the window, Samantha laughing, Michael lifting a toast. He didn't even glance toward the window. Did he know? Did she tell him? Or worse, was this what he wanted too? I bit my lip to stop the trembling. My chest felt tight, like 1,000 unsaid words clawed to escape but couldn't. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. I started the car. The engine sputtered like my heart did. Tired, worn, but still trying to move forward. I drove home in silence, the glow of their house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared altogether. Halfway down the road, the first tear fell. Then another. Then they came all at once, heavy and hot, fogging up my glasses as I whispered, "I hope you never forget what love looks like when it leaves." When I got home, I didn't turn the lights on. The house felt cold and foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I placed the cracked locket on the kitchen counter and stared at it under the dim light from the street lamp outside. I picked up a picture frame. Michael at 10 years old, holding a fishing rod twice his height. His grin so wide, so proud. "You caught the biggest one, Mom," he'd said back then. And now I was the burden to be thrown aside. My knees gave out and I sat on the kitchen floor, the photo frame pressed against my chest. "Why, Michael?" I whispered. "What did I do wrong?" The only answer was the ticking clock on the wall. Slow, steady, uncaring. But then, somewhere between the sobs and the silence, something changed. My breathing slowed. My tears dried. I looked at the photo again, this time with something steadier in my chest. A realization. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd quietly fade into the background while they lived their perfect little life. They forgot who raised that man, who built everything he had, who paid for his education, who worked nights, who starved so he could eat. And tomorrow I'd remind them. Not with tears, not with words, but with something they couldn't laugh at. I reached for my phone and opened my old contact list. It had been years since I'd last dialed that number, but I remembered it like a prayer. A name that carried power. A man who'd once said, "If you ever need anything at all, call me." I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Hello." I took a deep breath and said calmly, "It's time." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. In the distance, church bells began to ring for midnight. The night before my son's wedding, the night everything would change, had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. The clock ticked past midnight, and I just sat there, alone in the faint glow of my kitchen, staring at the cracked locket on the counter. Each tick of the clock felt like a small echo of every choice I'd ever made for my son. Every sleepless night. Every sacrifice. Every time I told myself it would all be worth it one day. That I'd watch him walk down the aisle and know that I'd done something right in this world. But as I sat there, with silence pressing against the walls, I realized something terrible. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was a stranger wearing my son's face. When Michael was born, I was 22, broke, and already alone. His father, Thomas, was gone before our son took his first breath. He left a note on the kitchen table that simply said, "I can't do this." No apology, no explanation, just those 4 words. I remember staring at that note with newborn Michael in my arms, whispering, "Then I'll do it myself." And I did. We lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store in Phoenix. I worked double shifts at the diner, came home smelling like grease and coffee, and rocked him to sleep with sore arms and a full heart. When the landlord raised the rent, I started cleaning offices on weekends. When Michael grew out of his shoes, I wore holes in mine so he wouldn't have to feel the same stones beneath his feet. I never told him how hard it was, because I didn't want him to see the world as cruel. I wanted him to see it as something that could be conquered. I wanted him to believe he could be more than where he came from. And oh, he did. He was smart, driven, always with his nose in a book and dreams far too big for our tiny apartment. When he got accepted into college, on a partial scholarship, I remember crying into my apron behind the diner counter. My boss thought something was wrong, but I told him, "No, something's right for once." I sold my car to cover the rest of his tuition, took out a small loan for his housing, skipped meals so I could send him care packages filled with the snacks he liked, the same silly gummy bears he used to beg for at the grocery store. He used to call every Sunday. He'd say, "Mom, I'm so proud to be your son." And I'd say, I'm proud to be your mom, sweetheart. Always. But over time, the calls got shorter. Then they stopped altogether. First, I thought it was just life. College, work, friends, maybe even love. But then came the silence. Months would pass before I'd hear from him, and when I finally did, he sounded distant, polite even, but no longer mine. He graduated with honors, got a high-paying job, moved into a condo in Scottsdale. He bought a new car, posted photos of vacations with colleagues I'd never met. I liked every post, commented with hearts, but he never replied. Then one day he called. "Mom," he said, "I've met someone." The joy in his voice made my chest ache. Her name was Samantha. Smart, beautiful, ambitious, from a well-off family. They met at a networking event. I remember thinking maybe this is what he needs. Someone to love him, someone to ground him. When I met her for the first time, she was polite, but not warm. She shook my hand, smiled for a photo, and spent the rest of dinner scrolling through her phone. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself she was just shy. But deep down I knew. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as a story Michael had outgrown. Still I stayed quiet. When they got engaged, I offered to help plan the wedding. She told me, "We already have a planner, but thank you." I asked if I could host the rehearsal dinner at my house. She said, "It's too small." Every idea, every offer, gently brushed away. Michael didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. He'd just squeeze my hand and say, "Mom, just relax. You don't have to do anything." But I wanted to. That's what mothers do. We show up. We help. We care, even when no one asks us to. The week before the wedding, I went shopping for a dress. I picked something simple. Pale blue with tiny embroidered flowers near the collar. The same color I wore when I took him to his first school recital. I even bought new shoes, the first pair I'd bought for myself in almost 5 years. That night, I sat by the window, holding the invitation he'd mailed me weeks earlier. It had gold edges, his and Samantha's names in elegant script. "Together with their families," it said. But I noticed something. Only her parents were listed. I tried to convince myself it was a printing mistake. I even called the planner, pretending to confirm the RSVP. When she asked for my name and I told her, there was a pause. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes, we have you listed as guest. Not mother of the groom. Just guest." I hung up, my heart sinking into my stomach. That's when I realized it. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd erased me. And still I showed up to the rehearsal dinner. Still I held that silver box, the one with the locket my mother gave me when she said, "Pass this on when you find someone worth trusting." I thought Samantha was that someone. I thought my son was still the boy who used to promise he'd take care of me someday. But I was wrong. Now, sitting in my quiet kitchen, I could almost hear her voice again, that sharp, measured tone. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family." I whispered it back to myself, almost in disbelief. Not part of this family. Then what was I? A stranger. A burden. A chapter they'd rather skip. I stood and looked around my little home, every corner filled with reminders of him. The photos on the fridge. The dent in the wall from when he practiced baseball indoors. The scarred table where we used to play cards on rainy days. I thought about how much love I had poured into him. How every sacrifice, every late bill, every lonely night had been for his future. For this moment when he'd be standing at the altar, happy and safe. And now, on the night before that moment, I wasn't even welcome. But as I stared out the window into the dark, something stirred deep within me. Not anger exactly, but something older. Something colder. "Resolve," I whispered to the quiet room. "You may have taken my place in that family, Samantha. But you don't know who you're dealing with." Because I wasn't some frail, forgotten mother. I was a woman who had built her life out of ashes. And I still knew how to start a fire when needed. That night, after she said those cruel words I'll never forget, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the teacup in front of me. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that hums in your bones. My son's laughter used to fill these rooms. His childhood trophies still line the shelf above the fireplace. The first soccer medal, the photo of him covered in cake on his 5th birthday. And yet, tomorrow, I wasn't supposed to exist. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I'd raised him right, that his happiness was all that counted. But every time I closed my eyes I saw her face, that smug, pitying smile as she said, "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family." Something in her tone wasn't just cruel, it was calculated, like she was making sure I understood my place. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker over the snow. Around midnight, I opened my drawer and took out an old wooden box, the one with the small silver latch. Inside were letters, a few family photos, and a worn-out flash drive. That flash drive was something my husband had left behind before he passed, a man as wise as he was quiet. He'd built our family business from the ground up, and when he died, he left everything in a trust, meant to be divided between me and our children. But there was one clause he insisted on. No spouse of any beneficiary shall inherit or manage the trust without the direct approval of all members. At the time I didn't think much of it. But that night, staring at the flash drive, I remembered why he'd said those words. He'd seen people change when money and status became part of love. And my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, she fit that description a little too well. The world was going about its business. At 9:43 a.m. my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister. "You're really not coming. Everyone's wondering where you are." I typed and deleted my reply 4 times. Finally I just sent, "I wasn't invited." Then, for a long time, nothing. At 10:10 a.m., the snow started to fall heavier. I looked out the window, imagining my son in his suit, tall, handsome, nervous. I whispered a small prayer for him. May love guide him, even if pride blinds him for a while. Then the phone rang. "Mom!" It was him. His voice was trembling, panicked. I could hear shouting in the background, someone crying. "Mom, where are you?" "At home," I said softly. "You told me not to come, remember?" There was silence. Then a soft, broken, "No, you said that." "I didn't. What's going on?" He hesitated, then his words came in a rush, the kind that comes when a dam finally breaks. "She called off the wedding. Right before the ceremony. She said she couldn't marry into drama. She said she deserved someone whose family actually respected her." I didn't say anything. I just listened because sometimes silence hurts more than words. He continued, voice cracking. "And then Dad's brother started shouting, and now everyone's blaming each other. Mom, I don't understand. How did it all fall apart?" I took a deep breath, looked at the flash drive still sitting on the table and whispered, "Maybe it didn't fall apart, sweetheart. Maybe it just revealed what was never real." Hours later he came home. My home. The same home he hadn't stepped foot in for almost a year. His eyes were red, his suit wrinkled. He didn't say a word when he saw me. He just stood there in the doorway like a child again. Then, without warning, he collapsed into my arms. "I should have listened to you," he whispered. "You were right about her." I didn't want to be right. God knows, I would have rather been wrong and seen him happy. But as I stroked his hair, I realized, sometimes love means letting them walk into the storm so they can finally see the lightning for themselves. 2 days later, the truth came out. The fiancée, or ex-fiancée I suppose, had been planning this for months. She'd learned about the trust clause and realized that unless I gave written approval, she would never have control over my son's inheritance. Her plan had been simple: marry him, isolate him, then convince him to restructure the trust. But when I refused to give my signature, and instead quietly had the family attorney reinforce the clause, she decided to remove me from the equation entirely. That night before the wedding, when she told me, "You're not part of this family," it wasn't just an insult. It was an eviction notice, one she thought she could enforce. She never expected me to smile and stay quiet. She never expected me to already know. In the weeks that followed, my son stayed with me. Slowly, the distance between us faded. He started helping around the house again, cooking breakfast like he used to when he was a teen. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, he asked, "Mom, why didn't you tell me about the clause before?" Smiled. "Because love isn't about control, sweetheart. It's about trust. And I needed you to see who trusted you for real." He nodded, eyes softening. "You knew she'd try to use me, didn't you?" I sighed. "I hoped she wouldn't. But when she did, I knew you'd have to learn the difference between someone who wants your heart and someone who wants your name." Months passed. The scandal of the cancelled wedding spread like wildfire through our small community. People whispered, as they always do. Some said I'd ruined everything. Others said I'd saved him. But I didn't care about their opinions. I cared about the quiet moments, the way he smiled again, the way he finally called me every morning just to say, "Good morning, Mom." Then, one spring afternoon, as we were planting tulips in the garden, he looked up and said something that made my heart swell. "Mom, I met someone." I froze, my hands still in the dirt. "She's different," he said quickly. "She works at the community center. She doesn't know about the business or the money. She just makes me feel calm." I smiled, really smiled this time. "Then don't rush it. Let love grow at its own pace." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I saw in him not the boy who chased success, but the man his father hoped he'd become. Looking back now, I sometimes think about that night. The cold porch light, the snow, the sting of those words. "You're not part of this family." If only she knew. I was the one who built that family from the ground up. I was the one who taught my son to love, to fight, to rebuild. And though that wedding never happened, something far more beautiful did. My son found his way back home, to himself and to me. As I write this, the tulips outside are blooming. The air smells of spring and forgiveness. Sometimes life's cruelest heartbreaks don't destroy us. They prune us, so the real love, the real roots can finally grow. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the truth finally came knocking. Not in the form of a confession, but a letter. A thick ivory envelope, with my family attorney's seal pressed neatly into the wax. I remember staring at it for a long while, my hands trembling slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were two documents: a statement of the trust's current holdings and a copy of an email thread between my son's ex-fiancée and a man named Daniel Rowe, a private financial advisor. At first, I didn't understand why the attorney had sent it. But as I read on, the pieces clicked together. Every cold glance, every half-truth, every carefully timed manipulation that had built up to that wedding. The fiancé had been planning to move all of my son's assets, including our family's commercial property and the stock from my late husband's company, into a joint marital management account the day after the ceremony. The email even had the subject line: "Transfer authorization. After wedding, immediate." And Daniel Rowe. He wasn't a random financial advisor. He was her cousin, the one who'd visited from out of town twice last summer, pretending to help with the catering lists. She'd woven her plan like a spider, patient, perfect, confident. But she'd overlooked one thing: my husband's clause. No spouse of any beneficiary shall manage or access the trust without approval of all members. And I had quietly reaffirmed that clause 2 weeks before the wedding, after noticing how often she'd been asking questions about inheritance timing. So when she tried to finalize the transfer, the attorney's office froze the entire account and sent me an alert. That was the moment everything turned upside down. She had discovered on the morning of the wedding that she wasn't marrying into a fortune she could control. She was marrying into a fortress she could never touch. That's why she'd called off the ceremony. That's why she'd lashed out, saying it was too much drama. She wasn't running from a wedding. She was running from a plan that had just crumbled in her hands. I sat back in my chair, the papers trembling in my lap. For a moment, all I could feel was sorrow. Not for her, but for the world my son had almost stepped into. I had spent months wondering if I had been too harsh, too proud, too distant. But that letter was proof that my silence had saved him. When my son came home that evening, I didn't greet him with, "I told you so." I simply handed him the folder and said, You should see this. He sat across from me, shoulders slumped, reading page after page. The light from the setting sun fell across his face, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to sit on that same floor with crayons and toy cars. When he finally looked up, his voice cracked. She was using me, wasn't she? I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. She saw what she wanted, sweetheart. And she mistook it for love. He stared at the papers for a long moment before whispering, "How did you know?" "Because," I said softly, "I've seen that kind of hunger before. It's never about companionship. It's about possession. And people who love you don't treat you like an investment." Weeks passed, and slowly the story faded from the whispers of our neighbors. But the wound it left, that one took longer to heal. My son started volunteering at a youth mentorship program. He said he wanted to do something real, something that isn't about money. I didn't push him. I just watched as he began to rediscover his purpose, bit by bit, piece by piece. One afternoon, he came into the kitchen while I was baking apple crumble. He looked at me with that mischievous spark I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "Mom," he said, "do you remember Dad's old watch? The gold one?" He nodded. "It's still in the safe. I'm thinking of wearing it again, not as a reminder of wealth, but of what really lasts." I smiled, holding back tears. "That's what your father would have wanted," I said. Then he did something I didn't expect. He took the watch from his pocket, held it in both hands and said quietly, "I want you to have it, Mom. Until I'm ready to wear it the right way." And for the first time since that horrible wedding morning I cried. Not from pain but from relief. Months later, on a warm June evening, my son came into the living room holding an envelope. "Mom," he said with a smile, "I'm starting a scholarship." "For who?" "For kids from small towns, the ones who want to build something but don't have the means. I'm naming it after Dad." He paused, then added, "And I want your name on it too. The Thompson Family Foundation." I couldn't speak. I just nodded and hugged him. That's when I realized, this was the real wedding. Not one with vows and flowers and guests who gossip, but one with forgiveness, growth, and quiet love reborn between a mother and her son. A few months later, I received another letter. This time it wasn't from a lawyer. It was from the ex-fiancée. She wrote just a few lines, an apology maybe, or something that tried to sound like one. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "I just wanted a better life. I thought I could handle everything, but I was wrong." I folded the letter and placed it in the same wooden box where my husband's flash drive rested. Then I whispered, "We all want a better life, dear. The difference is how we choose to earn it." Now, every spring when I look out my window and see the tulips bloom, I remember that winter. The cold porch, the sting of rejection, and the sound of my son's voice breaking over the phone. Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it hides behind heartbreak and silence. But when it returns, when it truly returns, it heals everything it once broke. That night before the wedding, she thought she was cutting me out of the family. But in the end, she cut herself out of the story. Because families built on truth can survive any storm. And lies built on greed crumble before the vows are even spoken. It's funny how life can twist in directions you never planned. One day you're standing on a porch being told you're no longer part of the family, and months later, you're sitting under the same roof with that same family, sharing quiet laughter over coffee and apple crumble. That night before the wedding changed something deep inside me, not just in how I saw my son, but how I saw myself. For years, I had let my silence be mistaken for weakness. I had played the part of the soft-spoken, gentle mother who never wanted to upset anyone. The kind who says, "It's okay," even when her heart is breaking. But that night, standing alone by the window, listening to the winter wind hum through the trees, I realized that silence, when used with purpose, isn't weakness at all. It's power. Because silence gives truth the space to reveal itself. When my son's fiancée spat those words at me, "After tomorrow you're not part of this family," I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I didn't curse her under my breath. I simply walked away and let time do what it does best: uncover the truth. And time didn't disappoint. It peeled back every layer of deceit, every selfish motive hidden behind a smile, every sweet word wrapped around manipulation, until only the truth was left standing. Sometimes I think about that girl, about how young and clever she thought she was. She believed wealth could buy belonging, that luxury could replace loyalty. But life has a way of humbling us. It shows us that money can build a house, but it can't build a home. I remember one morning, a few months after everything had settled, sitting in the garden with a cup of tea. My son joined me quietly, his eyes softer than I'd seen in years. He sat beside me and said, "Mom, sorry for not seeing through her sooner, for letting things get so far." I turned to him and smiled. "You don't need to be sorry, sweetheart. You loved her. Love makes us blind sometimes, but that's what makes it beautiful. It means you still believe in people." He looked down at his hands, then whispered, "I think I lost that belief for a while." "No," I said, taking his hand. "You didn't lose it. You just buried it. And now, it's time to let it bloom again." For a long time we sat there in silence, two souls finally finding peace. The breeze rustled through the magnolia tree, and I swear I could almost feel my late husband's presence in that moment, smiling somewhere nearby. The following week, we both drove out to visit his father's old resting place. My son carried a small wooden box. Inside it, the same gold watch he'd once given back to me. He placed it gently on the grave and said, "Dad, I finally get it. All the lessons. All the stories about honesty, patience, and earning things the right way. I get it now." He stood there for a long moment, then turned to me. "I want to start over, Mom. Build something that matters. Not because of who's watching, but because it's real." I smiled through the tears and nodded. "That's what your father always wanted, for you to build, not to chase." And right there, on that quiet hillside with the sun setting behind the hills, I knew something had shifted forever. The resentment had melted. The distance had disappeared. He wasn't just my son again. He was my friend. Over time, our lives found new rhythm. We started hosting small family dinners again. Not the grand, showy ones like before, but warm, simple meals where laughter came easy and stories filled the air. Sometimes, when the evening light would catch my son's face just right, I could see traces of the little boy who used to fall asleep on the couch after watching cartoons. And every now and then, when I'd see him laugh, really laugh, I'd whisper to myself, "This is what love looks like when it heals." A year later, he introduced me to someone new. Her name was Emily, a soft-spoken teacher with kind eyes and an honest smile that reached all the way to her heart. I could tell she wasn't after titles or bank accounts. She was after peace. And for the first time in a long time, I saw that same peace reflecting back in my son's eyes. When they got married, it wasn't a grand wedding. There were no marble halls or glittering chandeliers. Just a small backyard ceremony, with fairy lights strung between trees and the scent of lavender in the air. When they exchanged vows, my son turned to me and smiled, that same boyish grin that used to melt my heart. And when it was time for the dance, he came over, offered me his hand and said, "Mom, this time you are part of the family. Always." We danced under the stars, tears and laughter blending together, and I whispered back, "I never stopped being part of the family, sweetheart. I was just waiting for the family to find its way home." That night, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, I sat alone for a while, listening to the sound of crickets in the garden. I thought about how strange life can be. How the moments that break you can also become the ones that build you. If someone had told me that being excluded from my son's first wedding would lead to a second one filled with genuine love and laughter, I would have never believed them. But life doesn't give us what we want. It gives us what we need, even if we can't see it at first. Sometimes when I tell this story to my grandchildren, they look at me wide-eyed and say, "Grandma, weren't you angry?" And I smile and shake my head. No, darlings. Anger is heavy. It burns fast, but it doesn't warm you for long. Forgiveness, though. Forgiveness keeps you warm forever. They always giggle when I say that, and then they ask what I did to the fiancé afterward. I just wink and say, I didn't do anything. Life handled her better than I ever could. Now, as I sit by my window watching the sun sink behind the hills, I can't help but think, every rejection, every cruel word, every door slammed in your face. It's not the end. It's just life redirecting you to where you're truly meant to belong. Because the ones who push you away often teach you who's worth holding close. And the moments that seem like heartbreak are often the beginnings of your greatest peace. The night before the wedding, when that young woman told me I'd never be part of the family, she thought she was delivering a curse. But she didn't realize it was actually a blessing. Because sometimes, being pushed away from the wrong people is what frees you to embrace the right ones. And sometimes losing what you thought was family is how you finally learn what family really means.